everyone, and welcome back to Tabletop Odyssey. So, you want to play Malifaux? Now what? So I'm sure you've heard about Malifaux now. A game set in the weird and wild dimension of Malifaux. A steampunk, Wild West, and eldritch horror infused tabletop miniatures game. Unlike a lot of miniatures games, however, this one does not have dice. So what are you going to need to play? Well, in order to play the great game of Malifaux, you're going to need a tape measure or some other implement of measurement. You'll need access to the Malifaux rules, which you can get for free on Weird Games website, and you can access through their app. I would suggest you get the app anyway, regardless of your choice. You will need a set of 30mm bases that you can use as ski markers. For a lot of this game, you will use these markers to score with. Think of them a little bit like objectives. Finally, you'll need what's known as a fate deck. The fate deck is a deck of regular cards, but we use a little set of custom suits here. But you can, of course, use any set of cards that includes 2 different jokers. If you do not want to go to the effort of finding a measure and implement, ski markers, and a deck separately, each of the 8 factions within Malifaux contain a starter set. While they aren't exactly the best for playing a full game with, the 4 miniatures provided are great as a starting point, and the starter boxes do come with a set of 10 faction-specific ski markers, a measuring widget, and a fate deck for that faction. Speaking of factions, now that you know about Malifaux, you're probably wondering, which faction should I pick and why? So I'm going to give you a little bit of a run through about each of the factions and who they represent. First up, we have the Guild, who are the ruling class of Malifaux. The Guild of Mercentiles are a oppressive regime, and they protect the ordinary citizens of Malifaux, as long as it benefits them, of course. The 9 masters, or leaders, that you can choose from to represent your set of people, known as a crew, consist of, from left to right here, Lady Justice, a blind swordswoman who is skilled at fighting the undead with her death martial keyword, Perdita Ortega, who is a skilled gunslinger and a hunter of Neverborn, the natives of Malifaux, Lucius Matheson, who is a disguised mimic as one of the most administrative leaders of the guild. He represents the elite lawyers and the law, as well as the mimic, which, of course, are the more Neverborn side of things. You have Dashiell Barker, the head of the guild guard. Think of them like the police officers of Malifaux. They can get a little bit brutal at times. You then have Nellie Cochrane, the journalist in charge of the guild's propaganda newspapers. On the bottom row we have Sonia Creed, the inquisitor of the guild, who is a pyromaniac obsessed with hunting down witches with her witch hunter keyword. You then have Charles Hoffman and his augmented keyword, a skilled inventor who makes all manner of machinations and robots for the guild's use. Cornelius Bass is a sheriff of the Badlands, and he's here to restore order with his frontier keyword. hunting down any criminals. Finally, you have Harold Tull, whom the King's Empire, of the British Empire, have allowed an artillery specialist to assist the guild within their operations in Malifaux. The next faction is the Arcanists, who are the magical freedom fighters, or some might call terrorists, and they operate behind the Miners and Steamfitters Union as a cover. Within the Arcanists, you have Charles Hoffman themselves, who secretly, despite working from the guild, also supplies some of his robots to the Arcanists as well. You then have Marcus, who is halfway between the world of humanity and the world of the Neverborn, a Chimeramancer who is skilled at crafting flesh together. Sandeep Desai is a skilled elementalist, and he runs an academic school of mages. Karis is a pyromaniac and the leader of the more militant wing of the Arcanists. Safe to say, don't make her angry. You then have Tony Ironsides, the president of the Miners and Steamfitters Union, who definitely does love a good box in the ring. Up next is Mei Feng. Despite under the control of the Ten Thunders crime syndicate, the Mei Feng is responsible for the railways in Malifaux. Her and her foundry keyword are gifted with both fire and metal, unlike Rasputina, who is a gifted ice mage and somewhat cannibal, in service to the tyrant, a sort of god, called December. Up next is Damien Ravencroft, who has learned the secrets of the Tyrant Witness and has gathered the secrets of the Yellow Crypt. His witness keywords are definitely an interesting bunch. And finally, the performer Colette Dubois, who is, of course, a fantastic illusionist and magician, and sometimes a soulstone smuggler. Our third faction is the Resurrectionists. These are a bunch of nefarious necromancers who operate in the depths of Malifaux. First up, we have Molly Squidpidge, a undead journalist who gathers up all the lost souls of Malifaux. Yan Lo, in service to the Ten Thunders too, is an ancient wizard of incomparable evil who channels the magic of his ancestors to help him and his retainers. Professor von Stuck is an academic himself, running a school of necromancy within Malifaux's sewers. He is somewhat gifted, but a rather insane version of Dumbledore. Speaking of the insane, we have the insanitary Dr. McMorning, a Dr. Frankenstein clone, as you will, who brings to life his stitched-together machinations of flesh constructs. Kirai Ankoku, angry at the death of her beloved fiancé, summons forth ghosts from the beyond, Urami, for vengeance. The nun, Leva Cortinus, brings the light of fire to the revenant ghosts, bringing forth a sense of purpose that the grave spirit brings. Castor is a fallen Nephilim from ages past, resurrected with vampiric maliciousness. He seeks to grow and expand his once formidable empire. Jackdaw, the Hanged Man, an outcast among all, seeks to bring all the criminals of Malifaux hung back to torment those who strung them up. And finally, Seamus, a serial killer who resurrects his dead victims back to life. Molly Squidpidge, just one among them. Our fourth faction is the Neverborn. These are the natives of Malifaux. They operate in a sense to try and destroy the humans who they think have invaded their territory. Sometimes they do so with subterfuge, as is the mastery of Lucius Matheson and his mimic keyword. His doppelgangers infiltrate the elites of the guild and allow them to get some great intel. Nekema is a Nephilim, a demon of sorts, and her children are ready to claim back what is rightfully theirs. Euripides lives in the mountains of Malifaux, a giant, a seer who can predict the future. Next up is the returned Nephilim Castor and his vampiric origins, as well as the prior-mentioned Chimeramancer, Marcus. He has somewhat become enwildened by the magic of Malifaux. Next up you have the Dreamer, a child Earthside who, in his sleep, dreams up into reality a most prolific of nightmares from Nightmare Tyrant's power. You then have Titania, Queen of the Fae. Unfortunately, in sealing the tyrants in their respective prisons before, Titania had to succumb to the power of the Grave Spirit, and much of her once abundant domain is now undead. You have the Swamp Hag, Zoraida. While a human is as much a part of Malifaux itself, as she and her swamp fiends seem to become a part of the terrain. Finally, we have Pandora, that poor, pitiful girl who opened her box and all the woes within, that seek to torment both herself and the world around her. Outcasts make up the next faction. These group of mercenary beings are somewhat led by coin, but sometimes for their own power. Leviticus is one of those such. Seeking immortality, he creates a variety of amalgamations to seeking to preserve his life. Tara serves in the guise of the tyrant Obliteration, a nihilist from the world beyond, who seeks to obliterate everything and anything. Existence is futile. Zip is a gremlin pirate who runs a airship. A sky pirate, one might say. A happy-go-lucky fellow, he does seem to find good company amongst these criminals. Hamelin, a servant to the tyrant Plague, is, or rather was, a rat catcher. Now he uses his domain over the plague-filled beings of Malifaux to bring about his tyrant's domain. Tiri is a lost member of the Hour. She is technically, by definition, a Neverborn, but unlike the rest, she seeks to deter the power of the tyrants, especially Sharuf, who hurt her people, outcasts and nomads all. Victoria Chambers was once just a gifted swordsman and mercenary, but she is joined up with the doppelganger meant to assassinate her. Being displaced of a tyrant-infused sword known as Shazul, she still seeks to, well, provide great expertise with the blade regardless. She has a twin now, after all. Von Schill is a mercenary who is unhappy with how the guild has been operating and decided to make a path for his own. Him and his free corps are, of course, available to hire to the highest bidder. Parker Barrows, a skilled bandit and train robber. Well, he does have a grudge against Cornelius Bass, a lawless fellow, but, well, what's life without a fistful of script? And finally, Jack Daw and his domain of undead criminals. Well, they do like to torment those who have wronged them. Our next faction is the Bayou. This is a domain of the Gremlins who love to copy some interesting American cultures, let's say. First up, we've got Summerteeth Jones, who is a big fan of big hats, and he really loves to party with a room full of gremlins. Zoraida, the swamp hag, she seems to be just a part of the furniture here in the bayou, and her swamp fiends and Silurids certainly agree. The Clampit family rides a giant Silurid themselves, or sometimes their boat, and they and the angler keyword are great and renowned fishermen within the bayou. And what would the bayou be without alcohol, and lots of it? The brewmaster is a fantastic engineer of the finest liquor in Malifaux. Getting your opponents drunk is one way to win. Another would be to invest in the services of the firework maker Wong, who has 3 demons living inside a hat on his head. These demons tell him awesome things like shoot your own friends and make them glow, because glowiness makes you more powerful. He's super fun and likes to have explosions everywhere. Up next is Ulix, the pig farmer. He does have a whole suey full of keyword here, and he brings his entire farm to bear. What would the bayou be without the gremlin pirate Zip and his entire motley crew of sky pirates? Nor would it be without Ophelia and her kin, who have copied the art of Perdita Ortega, stolen her hat, and seek to replicate their finest heroes. And finally, Martucket, wielder of a giant spoon and sometimes giant robots. She loves her scrapyard and causing lots of chaos. Pit traps everywhere. Very tricksy. The 7th faction is the crime syndicate, the 10 Thunders, from the 3 kingdoms of Asia. The leader of the 10 Thunders currently is Misaki Katanaka and her last blossom keyword. They are, in a sense, assassins, perfect at killing and hiding in the shadows. Asami Tanaka is a poor woman who fell to a curse where she is unable to bear child. In her grief, she pledged herself to the Oni to restore herself, and now her children come from a mouth in the back of her head, except they are, well, Oni, not human. Yuko Hamasaki is the spy master for the 10 Thunders, and she runs a lovely theatre and pleasure house within the little kingdom of Malifaux. Ling Li, a Vietnamese librarian, is a bibliotech from the Red Library who brings her stories to life. Jacob Lynch happens to owe a massive debt to the 10 Thunders and his honeypot casino. He is not the only debt he has, however, as he also owes one to the Hungering Darkness, an eldritch being living in his basement, who he feeds the somewhat brilliance-addicted gamblers to. We then have Yanlo, the ancient evil of Malifaux, and his ancestors and retainers. Mei Feng, the brilliant train and railway maker, who is unfortunately also in service to the Thunders. Lucas McCabe, a dealer in artifacts, Malifaux's very own Indiana Jones, one might say. who has some debts with the Thunders too, and Shenlong, bearer of the Tyrant Dragon, master of all 4 elements, and the closest thing you'll get in Malifaux to Avatar: The Last Airbender. Our final faction is the Explorers Society. First up, we have Lord Cooper, the founder of the society, who really loves hunting big game, apex predators like dinosaurs, and, well, peasants too, I suppose. Nexus is a brilliant parasitic hive mind, who she and her Cadmus parasites seek to have an information network throughout Malifaux. The polymath genius, Maxine Agassiz, and her exploration vessel Superior, a submarine that she seeks to explore all of Malifaux's interesting depths. The nomadic Awa, Tiri, and the rest of her bygone people. English Ivan, who is neither English nor called Ivan, the leader of the Department of Ungentlemanly Affairs, a sinister group of spies, and Umbra, a shadowy world that he can bring into existence through his black soulstone. Next up, we have the ever-wandering and never-dying Yedza, the head of a rail syndicate, and probably one of the richest people in Malifaux, Anuli Carrion, the tomb delver, Lucas McCabe, and our frontier-loving sheriff, Cornelius Bass. So now you've decided on a faction within Malifaux, you now have to think about building a keyword. You've chosen your master, and now you need to think about what else you can get. So for example, Lady Justice is a master with the martial keyword. As part of this keyword, she also gets the Scales of Justice for free, because it is her totem. When hiring the martial keyword with Lady J as its leader, you get the master and the totem for free. You can also hire a henchman, which is a unique model that has access to soulstones, like a master, an enforcer, a unique model that doesn't have access to soulstones, and minions, which there are non-unique models that also don't have access to soulstones. Soulstones are the cost of models, or rather what's left over after hiring. You can have up to 10 in a game, and they can be used for a variety of effects, like giving additional flips for your cards, or for gaining extra cards in your hand, or for reducing damage to your crew. Looking here, Lady Justice can hire several people such as Ashbringers, Death Marshals, Exorcists, Domador de Cavalier, Death Marshal Recruiters, the Jury, the Lone Marshal, Director Rodriguez, and the Judge. She can also hire versatile and out-of-keyword models. Versatile models are those within the same faction as your keyword that you can also hire for no additional cost. So for Lady J, this is the guild. If you are to select a master like Charles Hoffman, who is in both the guild and the Arcanists, you would only be able to access the versatiles from the faction that you chose to play Hoffman within. Similarly, you are only allowed to take out of keyword models that are not versatile and do not share a keyword with your master, from the faction that you've chosen, but you have to pay an additional +1 cost. For example, the Rocketeer here is not in the martial keyword, he is a Cavalier model, so if Lady J wishes to hire it within her crew, or group of models, she would have to pay +1 cost. So now you've thought about your master and your crew, you're probably thinking, what do I buy first? Well, a good place to start is of course a starter box. It gives you all the tools such as a deck of cards, scheme markers, and a measuring tape. However, you don't have to pick one of these up to play, but it's suggested you do pick up the core box for the master and the crew that you'd like to play, as it comes with the master and the totem, as well as usually a henchman and some minions. For the example I've given here, we've got Charles Hoffman. If I wanted to play Hoffman in Arcanists, I would get the core box, and I could get the Arcanist starter box, which I can play with it. But that does not stop me from picking up an additional box called Keeping the Peace, which contains models within Hoffman's keyword, augmented, but are not within the Arcanist faction, because Hoffman is not restricted on what models he can use as long as they share a keyword or a faction with him. If you were going to start the game, I would consider getting the core box of the master you want, followed by either the starter box or an additional box with 3 or 4 models in for you to use in a 50 soulstone or standard size game. Remember to make sure you do need a fate deck to play, as well as some scheme markers, which will be helpful. So within the fate deck, sometimes it's not exactly obvious what it is. It's slightly different to a normal deck of cards, at least in how it's used. The suits of the deck are not your normal suits. First up, we have Crows, the green suit, which replaces the spades. Then you have Tomes, or blue suits, which replace the clubs. You have Masks, or purple suits, which replace the diamonds. And you have the Rams, or red suits, which replaces the hearts within a deck. Of course, you can still use a absolutely normal deck as long as it contains 2 jokers, because in this game they're very important. Malifaux runs numbers from 1 to 13, so your picture cards of Jack, Queen and King are 11, 12 and 13 respectively, and they separate them into 3 types of cards. 1 to 5 are considered weak cards for damage, 6 to 10 are considered moderate, and 11 to 13 are severe, which means that they'll have an increasing amount of damage depending on which ones you flip for it. You also have the Black Joker, which has a value of 0 and contains no suits, and the Red Joker, which contains a value of 14 and a suit of your choice. There's only one of these in the deck, however, so make sure to keep a hold of them if you find them. So now to explain a little bit about the cards in case they weren't entirely clear. First of up, we've got Lady Justice's card here, and the first arrow is pointing to her name. You then have this arrow pointing to the keyword. These are the models that she can hire, regardless of faction. Then you have her characteristics. She is a master, so she has 3 activations, and has access to soulstones, and she is also living, so will drop a corpse marker when she dies. If she were a construct, she would drop a scrap marker instead, and undeads also drop a corpse marker. You then have the cost of the model. Remember, as a master or a totem, this cost is not paid unless they're hired in a crew that doesn't share her keyword, and she is not the leader. You then have the statistics. You have a stat of defense, a stat of willpower, a stat of movement, how far you can move, and your size of model, which is used for line of sight. All of these can be targeted by enemy attack actions. Also here it shows the faction of the model, which is also represented with the colour of the card. In this case it is Guild. Here is the health of the model, how much before it's died and taken off the field, and here are the model's abilities. Abilities are often present through both turns of the game, but make sure you pay attention. Some triggers are done after killing, some are at the start of a turn, some at the start of activations, and some, like Lady Justice's defense brackets mask counterattack, allows you, when you flip a mask on your defense against an attack, you are able to do that effect. You then have, on the reverse of the card, the size of base this model uses, as well as the attack actions. These are contested duels, so both you and your opponent will flip cards to determine who wins. The higher model wins the conflict and determines whether or not damage is dealt. For example, the greatsword has a range of 2 inches, a stat of 6, which you add to what your card flip is, and if they are successful in doing an attack, they will do 3, 4, or 5 damage, depending on whether the damage flip was weak, 1 to 5, moderate, 6 to 10, or severe, 11 to 13. You then have tactical actions, which are non-contested actions that a master, or any model can use. These generally just have a target number, or TN, that you have to meet by flipping a card. In addition to everything on the card, every model in the game can also use a variety of general actions, such as walking, their movement speed, charging, which is a push of their movement followed by a melee attack, a slam, which can remove markers or move impassable and non-destructible ones, concentrate, which gives you the focus condition, interact, which places a scheme marker down or interacts with a strategy or model for points, and the disengage, which allows you to escape from a model's engagement. Conditions are also very important to the game of Malifaux. Some crews, like Karis, really love the burning condition, and some crews, like Tiri, prefer the shielded condition. Make sure to have a pause of this screen and read up on what each of these do. Now all of that is over and done with, let's think about playing your first game. You've got a box or two, you've got your deck of cards, your measuring tape, you've got a 3x3 playing space, and some terrain to fill it, and hopefully an opponent too. I would start the game at 35 soul stones. This is the points level of Malifaux. Remember, you can have up to 10 stones spare to use within the game. I start at 35 soul stones because most crews are able to use just the core box alone to hire for this, which means you only need 1 box to play. As you get more experience with the game, I'd move up to 50 soul stones, the standard size. We are currently within gaining grounds for the current tournament meta, as it were. Feel free to use any missions within the main rulebook, but for the moment on the app, here are the missions currently available this year, although I am sure it's soon to change. First of all, you select your deployment, be that standard, corner, flank, or wedge. They are determined within the rulebooks. You can see how they're deployed. I would start with standard because it's a lot easier to measure and you're simply opposite your opponent. You then have a choice of 4 primary missions or strategies in which you can score up to 4 points throughout the game on turns 2, 3, 4 and 5, 1 point apiece. I would suggest starting with plant explosives, as it is a mission that gives each of your crew, up to 5 people, a token that you plant on your opponent's side of the board to score points. It scores 1 point on turn 2 for 1 explosive, 2 for 2 explosives on turn 3, and so on. I would probably suggest Raid the Vaults as the next mission you try out, which is essentially a territory contesting where you want to claim the middle for 1 point apiece, or your opponent's vaults for 2 points apiece. Obviously, you want to gain more as the game goes on for more points. You can't score more than 1 point on a strategy each turn, and you cannot score them on the first turn of the game. Next up are your schemes. These are a group of hidden secondary objectives. Your opponent does not need to know what this is until you reveal it. Each scheme has a reveal point scored between turns 2 and 5, and a endgame point scored at the end of turn 5. You cannot score both points on the same turn, beware, but you can score either at the end of the game if you have not scored the other. So, the ones I would start with a pool of 3 for your first game, and each of you and your opponent picking 2 to try and score, before moving up to the standard pool of 5, where you still pick 2. My suggestions for the first 3 you try are Power Ritual, because it requires you to put scheme markers in the corners of the board for points. It's a relatively simple and easy to follow one. Information Overload is also great, as it gets you in the habit of dropping scheme markers all over the board, and you can score points if you have 3 or more, and more than your opponent, in your opponent's table half. Deliver a Message is also a great starting scheme from this Gaining Grounds, as it requires you to have a model interact with the opponent's leader, and then drop a scheme nearby at the end of the game. Some additional schemes, if you're moving up to 5 while you learn, would be Hold Up Their Forces, which needs 3 models to engage a model of higher cost than themselves. Can be quite difficult, but definitely something to consider when you reach 50 Soul Stones. And Espionage, which needs you to put a scheme marker down in your deployment zone, in the middle of the table, and in your opponent's deployment zone to score. So easy ones there. Okay, we've reached the end of the video now, and I hope you have enjoyed. If there's any more questions you have, please put them in the comments down below. And if you like this content, please make sure to like and subscribe. If you want some more help learning about the game, here are some channels which may be of use, as well as some content which allow you to do deep dives on individual masters, as well as great battle reports. I'm sorry, there are loads more channels, but there's only so much space to fit on one screen, so if I missed you, I'm incredibly sorry. Please shout me out in the comments and I'll make sure to pin you. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Tabletop Odyssey, and I will see you next time.